29 years ago, a young woman named Kaylee Morgan vanished on her way home after the night shift in Midland, Texas, leaving her family in devastating pain as every trace of her seemed to evaporate into the darkness. Police suspected a man who had been seen lurking near the store where she worked, but they never found the car, never found a body, and had almost no leads to pursue, causing the investigation to quickly go cold. Yet for nearly 3 decades, Kaylee's older sister never gave up hope, clinging to the memory of that final 30-second phone call in the middle of the night. Then one day, when a historic drought drained Lake J.B. Thomas to record low levels, a detail that once seemed meaningless suddenly emerged, a detail that, if it had been discovered back in 1996, could have changed the entire case. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from, and if you love cold cases that get solved after decades, don't forget to hit subscribe. Late fall nights in Midland, Texas, always carry an indescribable feeling, cold, dry and so vast that every sound seems to get swallowed by the West Texas wind. The pale yellow streetlights along Highway 349 stand motionless in the gusts, casting warped pools of light onto the pavement through the constant haze of fine dust, creating an atmosphere that feels both familiar and unsettling to anyone working late. The Allsup's convenience store sits quietly on the edge of town, tucked beside an empty parking lot where the smell of motor oil and red dust never quite dissipates. Behind the glass, Kaylee Morgan, 21 years old, night shift, was doing her final register check before locking up. Her hastily tied back hair cast a shadow on the window, blurred whenever the old neon sign flickered, that tired light making everything look like it was seen through fog. She slipped on a thin cardigan, clutched her purse tight, and pulled the door shut. A sharp click echoed in the dead silence, loud enough that even Kaylee paused for a second, as if the sound of the lock was too big for the stillness that enveloped everything. The last customer, a middle-aged man getting late-night gas, had just walked past her, and later told police she looked a little on edge, kept glancing toward the dark stretch of road in the distance where the night seemed thicker than usual. At the time, the man just thought she was nervous about the wind, but he never forgot that look, half wary, half hesitant, like she was hearing something he couldn't. Kaylee adjusted her purse strap, took a deep breath, and walked toward the parking lot. Under the last light, her shadow stretched long across the asphalt, trembling slightly with every gust. There were no footsteps except her own shoes, no cars passing, no one else in the frame, just a silence so complete, it made every movement Kaylee made seem small and alone. When she opened her car door, the old analog camera at the front of the store only captured a few grainy, noisy frames, her hand pulling the handle, her hair shifting, the yellow light hitting the side of the car, then the taillights glowing red across the dusty pavement. No one knows what Kaylee was thinking the moment she slid into the driver's seat. Maybe about the familiar road ahead, the heavy darkness lining both sides of the highway, the wind brushing against the windows, or maybe she just wanted to get home fast and escape the cold seeping through her thin sweater. But only one sentence was ever confirmed. During the short call to her sister, Kaylee's voice was soft and a little shaky, like she was trying to steady her breathing. "I'm on my way, it's really dark out here." That was the last time anyone ever heard her voice. When the lights in the house were all off, when the town had settled into the same quiet as every other night, the Morgan family was still awake, waiting for Kaylee to walk through the door like she always did after a late shift. But the house stayed silent. No car pulling up, no key in the lock. Call after call went straight to voicemail. Worry quickly turned to panic when Kaylee's phone went completely dead. There was no reason for her to disappear like that in the middle of the night. When they couldn't reassure themselves any longer, the Morgans called the Midland County Sheriff's Office, voices choking with urgency. "She's missing. Please send someone now." When the Morgans' desperate call came into dispatch, the calm of a Midland night was instantly shattered. Cases of adults losing contact for a few hours are sometimes treated as low priority, but the tremor in her mother's voice, the way she insisted Kaylee never does this, made the night operator take it seriously. Within minutes, 2 Midland County Sheriff's patrol cars turned into the neighborhood, their yellow lights reflecting off low trees and silent houses under pale moonlight. No one in the Morgan house was panicking loudly. They just had that thick, heavy kind of silence you only see when something is too wrong to put into words. Kaylee's jacket still on the chair, her spare sneakers exactly where she left them, her late-night meal untouched on the kitchen table. Everything gave the officers an immediate gut feeling. This wasn't a typical adult walkaway. After a few basic questions, one of the deputies classified Kaylee as an endangered missing adult. No history of running away, no conflicts, no reason, and most critically, vanished on the short drive home just minutes after leaving work. Without hesitation, a search team was mobilized that same night, starting with the route Kaylee always took from Allsups. The familiar road suddenly felt alien under sweeping patrol lights that cut through the pitch-black asphalt. They drove slowly, scanning both shoulders, the low grass, the wind-scoured patches of dirt, the rough black streaks just meters off the highway. But there were no skid marks, no strange tire tracks, nothing dropped. One deputy walked while taking notes, and the farther they went, the more baffling it became. If there had been an accident, there would be something. If Kaylee had pulled over, there would be a spot showing it. But it was just endless empty highway, and West Texas darkness swallowing every clue. They continued to the Allsup store, the starting point of her final trip. Deep into the night, the parking lot under the dim yellow lights was still deserted. Not a single car or person. The side windows were coated in a thin layer of dust, reflecting the officers like faint ghosts. When the store employee arrived to let them in, they rewound the old analog footage. The machine hissed softly as the tape rolled back, grainy frames flashing by so fast they had to watch multiple times. And there she was, Kaylee walking out, locking the door, heading to the lot. But what caught the officer's attention wasn't her actions. It was a faint movement at the edge of the frame, something that briefly blocked the light for a split second. It wasn't clear if it was a person, an object, or just noise in the tape, but the anomaly was enough to make them flag it. They couldn't confirm anything, but they couldn't ignore it either. While the officers reviewed the footage, one of Kaylee's co-workers from the earlier shift arrived, visibly anxious. As soon as she heard Kaylee was missing, she immediately remembered something. She mentioned a strange car that had been parked in the lot for a long time lately. Dark color, I think a pickup, parked way at the end. The room went quieter. An officer asked if Kaylee had described the roof or the plates, but the co-worker only recalled that Kaylee said it was parked kind of close and no driver visible. Though the detail wasn't enough to call a solid lid yet, it was immediately flagged. First red flag. A strange vehicle, showing up for days, no driver, no explanation, and coincidentally present when she disappeared into the darkness, not far from the store. Still, police had to follow protocol. No evidence, no conclusions. Back in the parking lot, they shone flashlights on the far end, where Kaylee usually parked. The wind whipped dust into the beams, making the air shimmer with particles. There was nothing but faint dust devils and long shadows stretching toward the road. Officers expanded the search to the surrounding area, including the dirt roads nearby. But everything remained completely empty. No footprints, no scraps of paper, no sign of anyone, nothing to hold on to. When the first night's search ended in heavy confusion, the officers returned to the Morgan house to update them. The whole family sat close together on the couch, every light in the house blazing as if brightness could push back whatever they were afraid of. When the officers said they hadn't found anything yet, silence fell over the room like wind slicing across an empty oil field. No one spoke, but everyone understood. This was no longer an ordinary delay. This was a complete disappearance without a trace. That night in Midland felt colder, darker, and vaster than ever. Kaylee had walked into that darkness and left no explanation behind. The next morning, before the Midland sun had even burned off the early fall chill, investigators were back at Allsups. They needed to reconstruct Kaylee's final minutes exactly, not just from reports or blurry footage, but from what real people actually saw, heard, and felt in those moments. The last customer, the man getting late-night gas, was brought in for an interview. He sat in a cold metal chair, hands clasped, eyes mostly on the floor instead of the investigator. Not because he was a suspect, but because he was haunted by the image of Kaylee he couldn't shake and couldn't explain. He said when he walked out of the store, he saw Kaylee standing under the light, staring down the dark road heading south out of town. He didn't hear any strange noises, or see anyone else in the lot, but there was something about the way she stood that felt off, not outright terrified, but a subtle tension, the kind of instinct that told him she was trying to listen for something he couldn't hear. She wasn't running, wasn't rushing, he said, but she also wasn't normal, like someone trying to decide whether to be scared or just imagining things. That description made the investigator ask again and again, did Kaylee say anything to him? Was anyone following? Was there a car nearby? But the man just shook his head. All he heard was the wind and the streetlights rattling. Nothing more. Unsatisfied but unable to push further, the investigator turned to the map. In the store's break room, they spread out an old paper map of Midland County. The distance from Allsup's to Kaylee's house was simple. Straight up Highway 349, then a short turn onto the residential road to the north side neighborhood. About 17 minutes at normal speed. In those 17 minutes, Kaylee should have made it home with plenty of time to spare. Yet somewhere in that short window, she vanished completely without a trace. The investigator marked Kaylee's departure point in red, then drew a thin line straight to her house, clean and straight like the road itself. Then they divided the route into 5 segments: near the store, the gentle uphill on the highway, the oil field section, the darkest mile marker, and finally, the turn into the neighborhood. And then the core question, where in those 17 minutes did Kaylee disappear? Simple question, no simple answer. When they checked the few traffic cameras in the area, scarce in 1996, there was no footage showing how far Kaylee got after leaving the lot. Every possible camera spot, the gas station across the street, small warehouses, lights at intersections, was either broken or pointed the wrong way that night. The 1996 camera system in Midland was so limited that the few frames from Allsup's were practically the only visual evidence of the entire night. That's when a young investigator, new to the job, made a crucial observation. The FM 1788 stretch, one part of Kaylee's usual route, was a total blind spot. Wide, dark, stretching between empty land with no lights, no cameras, no houses right on the road, and hardly any traffic besides occasional oil trucks. It was the perfect place for a vehicle to stop unnoticed, the perfect place for someone to approach, follow, or force Kaylee off the road. But it was all theory, nothing to prove or disprove it. The investigator circled FM 1788 in red, and wrote on the map, dead zone, no visual coverage. Right below it, in smaller letters, high risk for abduction. The team stood silently staring at the map for a few seconds. A strange feeling filled the room. The route was straight, the time short, everything so simple it should have been easy to figure out. Yet that very simplicity was hiding something more complicated. The lead investigator said quietly, if someone wanted to take advantage of Kaylee driving home alone, this is the stretch they'd pick. But he also stressed, this wasn't a conclusion, just the first step in rebuilding the timeline. A skeleton with no flesh yet, no twists, no leaps, just one question. Kaylee left the store, got in her car, headed north, and disappeared in 17 minutes. No calls, no cries for help, no sign of what happened. As the investigators packed up the map, their eyes drifted back to the analog footage still looping slowly. Kaylee stepping out and glancing toward the darkness, just a quick, subtle turn of her head, but enough to send a chill down the spine. The whole team knew they had to find the answer to those missing 17 minutes, because in that final glance, it felt like Kaylee had already sensed what they were only starting to suspect. Something was waiting for her out there in the black ribbon of FM 1788. As the sun rose over the West Texas horizon, the first light swept across dusty fields, revealing a landscape so vast it felt eerie. Morning in Midland was no livelier than night, especially on the roads leading out to the outskirts where the wind never stops and rock and dirt stretch to distant tree lines. Police knew they had to use every minute of daylight for the real search for Kaylee Morgan. The sound of helicopters came first, a low rumble from far off that grew clearer. One from the sheriff's office, one from Texas DPS, flying grids along Highway 349, and the FM 1788 stretch they believed Kaylee had traveled before vanishing. From the air, everything looked flat and monotonous. No burned car, no wreck, no unusual stop, just dry land and a straight black road like a knife cut across the desert. On the ground, patrol units and volunteers began expanding the search radius. More than 30 people walked in a line, flashlights, probe rods, evidence flags in hand. Tracking dogs were brought in, sniffing along drainage ditches, dry gullies, patches of wind-whipped grass. Local hunters, who knew the terrain like the back of their hand, joined too, pointing out dirt tracks oil trucks sometimes used to cut across the plains. Yet all they found was wind. No purse, no phone, no scrap of clothing, no sign Kaylee had ever stopped or gotten out. The longer the silence lasted, the heavier the unease grew. It was the kind of silence anyone who searched for a missing person recognizes, the silence of nothing at all, desperate and dangerous, because it means the person may have vanished too fast to leave anything behind. Only when the search team pushed deeper into the area where a dirt road connects FM 1788 to County Road 1130 did something finally appear. An officer crouched down, touching the ground, where dust had been compressed into long oval shapes, tire tracks. Not the big ones from oil rigs, not the small ones from Kaylee's Civic, something in between, the common tread pattern of a light pickup. What caught everyone's attention wasn't the tracks themselves, but how they abruptly vanished after just a few meters, as if someone had deliberately erased the rest. The tracks were so faint you had to look from the side to see them. They came off the dirt road toward a big mesquite tree, then suddenly stopped, cut off by ground that had been lightly raked, as if someone used a branch or brush to obscure it. The officer marked the spot with a small orange flag and made a note, but he knew in the early stage of a missing person case, that detail was just note for follow-up, not a lead, not conclusive. Even the tracking dogs gave no clear alert. They sniffed around the tire tracks, circled a few times, then went back to the main road, as if the scent here was too faint to follow, a common sign when hours have passed, or when wind and dust have altered the area. Volunteers kept pushing farther, checking every side trail into the abandoned land nearby. A few climbed natural rock mounds for a higher view, hoping to spot the glint of metal or scattered debris. But from every angle there was only scattered brush, empty dirt roads, and long shadows from power poles, a landscape that didn't care, swallowing every trace of human presence. As the sun climbed higher, the harsh West Texas light made seeing easier, but also exposed the desperation. No sign of Kaylee's car, no personal items, nothing to grab onto except those faint tire tracks, both the first clue and proof that someone might have tried to erase something here. And in that moment, the lead investigator looked out over the empty land where the wind blew hardest and wondered if Kaylee really disappeared here. How? Who could do it so fast? They left almost nothing behind. And why this stretch, perfect for everything to happen in total silence? That morning's search ended without answers, only adding a heavier feeling. Kaylee hadn't simply gotten lost in the wilderness. She had vanished from this place in a way no one could yet understand, at least not yet. When the first morning's search ended without turning up a single item or trace of Kaylee, investigators decided to widen the approach by verifying everyone who had been in the area during the window she disappeared. One of them was an oil tanker driver, who regularly ran crude from the western fields to the refinery near Big Spring. He was brought to the station for an interview, and what he described made the air in the room thicken in a way that was hard to explain. He said that on the night Kaylee went missing, while driving a dark stretch not far from Allsup's, he saw two vehicles running side by side, like one was trying to crowd the other. He couldn't be sure because the lights from his tanker cabin only illuminated a narrow strip ahead, but that image, two parallel streaks of light in the darkness, stuck with him. He said everything happened so fast, he didn't get a good look at colors or makes, only that they weren't driving normally. Unusual speed too close together, and veering off the center line, were the details that made him glance in the rearview mirror. When the investigator asked why he didn't stop, the driver just said, "On FM 1788, weird stuff happens all the time. I didn't think it was anything serious." But the next morning, When I heard a girl was missing, I figured I should say something. What made the story even stranger wasn't the statement itself, but the fact that the driver had reported it on the very day Kaylee was reported missing, yet that report never appeared in the main case file the team was reviewing. It was tucked into a loose stack of notes, slipped into a thin folder, never entered into the official sheriff's office case file. When they tracked it down, a veteran officer just shrugged and said, "Wasn't a strong lead." The desk guy probably flagged it as unverified, an explanation that sounded reasonable in the initial chaos, but still left an uneasy feeling, because in the first hours of a missing person case, every piece of information matters. Having a report like that fall outside the file added another layer of murkiness. When the investigators went back to the map, they drew another red circle around the stretch where the driver said he'd seen 2 vehicles. That changed the atmosphere completely. Before, Kaylee had simply been gone from the route, but the driver's statement opened the possibility she hadn't been alone on the road at that moment. At the same time, another piece of information surfaced, this one from a woman who lived near County Road 1130, the same area the morning search team had covered, and where the faint tire tracks were found. She didn't usually talk to police. A family member just happened to mention that patrol cars had been through the night. Kaylee vanished, so if she remembered anything odd, she should speak up. When asked, she hesitated, but finally confirmed that on that exact night, she heard a short scream, weak but distinct, a woman's voice. She said it wasn't an argument, wasn't a long cry for help, just a sound like someone startled or caught off guard by something. When the investigator asked why she hadn't called police right then, the woman just sighed. "Out here people yell all the time, kids playing, dogs barking. I didn't think it was anything serious." And it only lasted a second. The investigator wrote it down, but they all knew what she heard was extremely vague. A brief sound, source unclear, hundreds of yards from the scene. Not evidence yet, not even a solid lead, but it lined up eerily with the faint partially erased tire tracks found on County Road 1130. Still, at that point, everything they had was just scattered fragments. Partially erased tire tracks, a witness seeing 2 vehicles running side by side, a short scream, blurry camera footage with movement at the edge of the frame. None of it carried enough weight to conclude anything. None of it led to Kaylee or her silver Civic. When the investigators wrapped up that day, they looked again at the full timeline board. Continuous arrows, red circles marking suspicious areas, but everything still revolved around one single truth. Kaylee had disappeared too cleanly, too quietly, too perfectly, to point to any clear investigative direction. And in the endless silence of the West Texas plains, those faint clues only made the picture more mysterious, not one step closer to an answer. The first weeks after Kaylee vanished were a mix of hope and despair, hope that she'd be found somewhere, holed up or in a minor accident, despair because every day that passed without a sign made that hope thinner. Midland police kept searching with everything they had. They expanded beyond Kaylee's usual route, sweeping a nearly 30-mile radius, checking dirt roads, old wells, abandoned mining sites, any place a car could have gone off or been forced into. But the more they looked, the colder the truth became. There was no crime scene, no skid marks from hard braking, no impact point, no footprints, none of Kaylee's personal items, not her purse, not papers, not car keys, not a scrap of fabric, no drag marks. Every physical trace that could have pointed somewhere, even the smallest clue, was completely absent. Residents along FM 1788 and County Road 1130 were interviewed over and over, but every answer only confirmed one thing: that night had been too quiet. Even the scattered statements, like the faint tire tracks or the short scream, couldn't be turned into anything legally or investigatively useful. They were vaguer than the investigators had hoped. The lead investigator repeated to the team again and again, "To move this into a criminal investigation, we need a scene, and the scene doesn't exist." That sentence made everyone feel a helplessness that's hard to describe. In most missing person cases, police rely on one of 3 pillars: the vehicle, the phone, or traces at the last known location. In Kaylee's case, all 3 had evaporated: phone dead, Civic gone. Allsup's footage showed nothing clear. Even the few traffic cameras on main roads back then, already scarce, offered no leads. No frame of Kaylee driving, no license plate captured, no image of a strange vehicle before or after she left the store. The cameras were pointed the wrong way, or simply not working that night. The stalemate dragged into the second month, then the third. By the end of winter, the search couldn't maintain its initial intensity. Volunteers went back to their regular jobs. DPS helicopters were reassigned. The K9 units couldn't keep sniffing when there was nothing to scent match. Many volunteers who had helped search said they felt swallowed by the sheer size of the place, a feeling anyone gets trying to find something tiny in a landscape as unreasonably huge as West Texas. Into the new year, Kaylee's family kept her room exactly as it was, kept putting up posters, kept hoping someone, somewhere would see her. But for the police, the file was starting to show signs of going dormant. Random tips from the public slowed to a trickle. Every call about someone who looked like Kaylee was checked and came up empty. And the greatest fear of every investigator in a missing person case slowly became reality. The case wasn't moving. Inside the sheriff's office, the final update meeting on Kaylee Morgan took place in spring 1997. They reviewed everything they'd done: ground searches, aerial searches, witness interviews, local sex offender and criminal record sweeps, checks of impound lots, reports of abandoned vehicles in the county. The final conclusion was one short, heavy sentence: no actionable lead they could act on, no analyzable direction, no way to expand the investigation. At the same time, the Texas Rangers were brought in to review the file, but they couldn't do much more than confirm that the stretch where Kaylee disappeared was one of the hardest to investigate at the time. No cameras, no nearby homes, no physical evidence, a black hole in investigative terms. And so, not with ceremony, or a big announcement, but with a quiet administrative action, the file labeled Kaylee Morgan received a pale blue sticker, the color reserved for cold cases. The case was officially frozen. Kaylee Morgan's name became one of Midland's unsolved mysteries of 1997, a story locals brought up in conversation as a vague warning: some people drive into the West Texas night and never come back. 10 years passed since the night Kaylee Morgan disappeared into the West Texas darkness. Midland had changed a lot. Roads widened, old wells filled in, traffic cameras becoming more common, population growing with new oil booms. But in the cold storage room behind the Midland County Sheriff's Office, a dusty tan file box still sat in the same spot, untouched for years. On the label, the ink had faded: Morgan, Kaylee, missing person, 1996. In 2007, when the county's cold case unit was reorganized with new staff, Kaylee's file was added to the review list. The first person to open that box was Lauren McConnell, an investigator freshly transferred to cold cases after years in patrol. Lauren had no emotional tie to the case. She only knew it from stories older deputies told. But when she opened the file for the first time, what struck her wasn't Kaylee's story. It was how thin the stack of papers was for such a major disappearance. Lauren started by organizing everything chronologically: the family's initial report, early search reports, witness statements, 1996 marked up maps, and a few radio log copies from that night. When she laid it all out, she immediately sensed something was off. One item in the original report list skipped a number from item 12 straight to 14. Item 13 was missing. She double-checked the master file, flipping page after page, but item 13 really wasn't there. Where it should have been, only a faint tear line remained, as if someone had ripped the page out early on. Lauren noted it, but drew no conclusion. In the 90s, lost paperwork wasn't rare. Still, a single numbered page gone missing from the critical early search phase was something she couldn't ignore. Digging further, Lauren found loose documents someone had clipped inside the file. One was a stakeout report, a hastily penciled night watch note describing an officer parked near FM 1788 on the third night after Kaylee vanished. It was only a few lines mentioning odd lights in the distance, dark-colored pickup moving slowly, and nothing significant observed. What made Lauren sit up straight wasn't the content, it was that the report had no signature, no officer name, no badge number, no exact timestamp, just hard, slightly slanted handwriting and a final line, "End of observation." An unsigned report was extremely unusual. Lauren checked the duty roster for that night, but found no one claiming authorship. Some officers had retired, others transferred. The bigger question, why was this report never in the main file, just loosely clipped as if it had never been properly processed? As Lauren kept going through the remaining documents, she found something that suddenly made the entire case far more confusing. In the detailed phone record for Kaylee the night she vanished, obtained from the carrier under a 1996 assistance order, there was an incoming call lasting a few seconds, placed just minutes before the final call to her sister. The number wasn't in her known contacts, and didn't match any Allsup's customer, co-worker, friend or family member. Even stranger, when Lauren cross-checked the 1996 file, that number had been flagged for follow-up, but was never traced to an owner. In the original officer's faded note, there was only one line, "Not identified, possibly prepaid, low priority." Lauren knew that in 1996 tracing a phone number wasn't as easy as today, but low priority made no sense. In a no-lead disappearance, every call should have been thoroughly checked. Lauren ran the mystery number through the updated 2007 databases. Result: no record found, unregistered, not tied to any current carrier, not in any valid records. A phone number that existed for one moment, then vanished from the system, as if it had never been. 3 things: a torn-out report page, an unsigned stakeout report, a mystery phone call never fully investigated. None of them enough to reopen the case. But put together, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that Kaylee Morgan's disappearance had not been handled completely from the start. Not because of lack of manpower or equipment, but because something in those first days had slipped through the cracks, or worse, been overlooked without anyone noticing. And from those gaps, Lauren knew that if she wanted the truth, she had to start over, from the smallest things the original investigation had missed. Because sometimes, in cold cases, the answer isn't in what was written down, it's in what disappeared from the file. After reviewing the entire file and spotting the irregularities, the torn page, the unsigned stakeout report, the untraced mystery call, Lauren McConnell decided to approach the case in a completely different way from 1996. If human data wasn't enough, she needed the land's data, the terrain, the road itself that Kaylee had driven that night. To do that, Lauren used a tool the original investigators didn't have: GIS, Geographic Information System, combined with terrain data and West Texas maps archived from the mid-90s. Lauren opened the program on the big screen in the cold case meeting room and loaded the 1996 terrain map from the Texas State Library. The screen showed a parched landscape dotted with old oil wells, abandoned rigs, low-lying areas, and small dirt roads threading through the Midland outskirts like veins. It was the kind of map a 1996 investigator couldn't access in that detail, but now digitized, every meter of ground was reconstructed so clearly you could see changes in individual road segments. What Lauren wanted to recreate wasn't just Kaylee's usual route, but every possible detour she might have taken, whether accidental or forced. She entered the starting point at Allsup's, then the end point at Kaylee's house. The system drew the straight 17-minute route, up Highway 349, and into the neighborhood. But Lauren didn't stop there. She added a critical data layer, stretches where a vehicle could turn off under low-light conditions, based on sloped sightlines and dirt road intersections. When that layer appeared, the screen lit up with orange zones: 3 likely pull-off points along the route. All 3 were in areas with the weakest road lighting in 1996, and had dirt tracks leading to old oil sites, perfect places for a car to leave the highway unseen. Lauren zoomed in on the first, an entrance to a drilling site, closed since 1993. According to the map, it had no fence at the time of Kaylee's disappearance. The ground sloped gently down. A car turning in would vanish from highway view in just a few meters. The second lay a few miles farther, near a decommissioned oil separator facility. The dirt road there was wider but full of potholes, meaning tire tracks would quickly be covered by wind and sand, explaining why the 1996 search teams found nothing obvious. The third point, the one that caught Lauren's attention most, was near the spot where the search team had found the faint, partially erased tire tracks. When she overlaid the terrain layer, the reason was clear: the area was a natural dip, completely hidden from traffic in both directions. If a car turned in here, its headlights would disappear almost instantly from anyone on the road. When combined with the tanker driver's statement about two vehicles side by side, the third point matched perfectly with a scenario of one vehicle trying to crowd or block Kaylee. And one more thing, all 3 points led to abandoned oil sites. In 1996, old oil field property was basically ignored. No cameras, no security, no activity. If someone wanted to force Kaylee off the highway, or if she was forced to stop, these were truly invisible places. Spots where a brief confrontation, a struggle, or a violent act could happen without sound or light escaping. Lauren marked the 3 points with thick red circles. This wasn't evidence, not a conclusion, but it was a plausible scenario drawn from terrain data, modern tech, and what they knew about the route Kaylee took. It was the first step toward filling in the 17-minute gap that neither the old team nor the new one had ever cracked. When Lauren zoomed out and looked at the big picture, something sent a chill down her spine. All 3 points lay within the same narrow strip of land, running parallel to FM 1788, a strip that deputies back then had privately called the stretch nobody sees. Kaylee Morgan had vanished within that window of time and space, and Lauren knew, if the secret of the case was anywhere, it was buried in the desolate patches around those old oil sites, places the lights of Midland never reached. Nearly 3 decades after the night Kaylee Morgan disappeared, West Texas suffered the worst drought since 1950. Reservoirs across the region dropped week by week, day by day, exposing cracked mudflats and huge rocks that had lain dozens of feet underwater for decades. Among them, Lake J.B. Thomas, a wide but shallow reservoir between Scurry and Borden counties, became the poster child for the drought when its water level fell to the lowest ever recorded. To locals, the sight at first just felt sad and worrisome for the dry season. But to Lauren McConnell, now one of the most seasoned investigators on the cold case team, the drought meant something else. When she watched the news footage of the receding shoreline and vast expanses of lake bottom emerging, a strange urge hit her. Her mind flashed back to the 2007 GIS map, the suspicious points, especially the third one, sitting right near the upstream area that once fed into J.B. Thomas. A thought struck her so hard, she stood up. What gets revealed when the water goes away? Less than a week later, on a stifling early August morning in 2025, a Texas Water Development Board survey crew was out measuring the lake level. As they drove along the southern shore, one of the technicians spotted something glinting in the sunlight, a few hundred yards out on the cracked, dried mud. At first he thought it was just a piece of metal from fishing gear or industrial trash the water had carried in. But as they got closer, the patchy reflection started taking on a clearer shape. It wasn't random scrap metal, it was the roof of a car, specifically the top of a compact sedan, its silver paint worn and mottled by decades of time and lake minerals. The technician immediately called the crew chief, and within 2 hours, the area was temporarily sealed off, until investigators from the Scurry County Sheriff's Office arrived to take over the scene. Lauren got the call right after, when the voice on the other end said, "We found a silver car, roof sticking out of the mud." She felt her heart pound in a way she didn't want to admit. She jumped in her truck and drove straight to J.B. Thomas down the cracked road to the shoreline. The closer she got, the more surreal it felt, a huge section of the lake now just endless mudflats, and there, like evidence time had hidden for 29 years, was the car roof sealed in dried mud. As the forensic team pushed the excavation, the whole vehicle emerged. An early '90s Santa Civic, silver. The moment Lauren saw the faded Honda logo under the mud, she knew they had found Kaylee Morgan's car. The doors were locked when the Civic was winched out of the muck, but rust and minerals had warped some parts. The driver's door finally gave way with a pry tool, revealing a dark, damp interior, like a forgotten metal tomb. The forensic team shone lights into the cabin, and every detail froze Lauren in place. Inside the car, an empty leather wallet, no ID, no money, nothing identifiable. One women's shoe wedged under the passenger seat, the exact style Kaylee wore to work. The driver's seatbelt torn, not age-related, but ripped along the tension line, like it had been yanked hard. A small brownish streak under the driver's seat. The forensic team suspected blood diluted by decades of lake water and mud. And most importantly, no body in the car. The entire back seat and trunk were empty. No signs anyone had died inside. No bones, no soft tissue, no remains they could pull DNA from. That raised a chilling question. If Kaylee had ever been in this car, when was she removed? And why was the car sunk without a body? While the forensic team kept collecting samples, Lauren examined the undercarriage, and one detail nearly took her breath away. The right front tire was completely flat, deflated like the air had been let out before the Civic was pushed into the lake. That matched eerily with the suspicious point she had flagged on the GIS map, the dirt track near the old oil site, where a car could have been forced to stop. The mud under the chassis also showed the Civic hadn't rolled into the lake on its own momentum. It had been pushed, wedged with rocks and heavy objects to sink deeper. A clear sign someone wanted the car hidden. Lauren stood quietly in the dry wind of the drained lake, staring at the Civic lying on its side, like a long overdue confession. They had searched for this car for nearly 30 years, and it was here, less than 15 miles from the route Kaylee always drove, in a lake no one had ever thought to check, because the water had always been deep enough to hide it. This was the rug pull moment, the real turning point. No more guessing, no more vague fragments. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the Kaylee Morgan case had an actual crime scene. But at the same time, the discovery opened a new abyss. If Kaylee wasn't in the car, if there was no body, if the seatbelt was torn, if the car had been deliberately sunk, then who did it? And what had happened to Kaylee before the Civic disappeared beneath this lake? Lauren knew the answers lay in whatever they found next, and for the first time in 29 years, the case was no longer frozen, it was moving. The silver Honda Civic was pulled from the lake bed like evidence buried for nearly 30 years, but once it was loaded onto a flatbed and transported to the Texas Department of Public Safety lab, Lauren understood the hardest part was only beginning. Lake water, mud, minerals, time, all of them destroy traces. Yet the very existence of the tiniest surviving clues could open entirely new investigative paths. The car was taken into the DPS-controlled environment garage, where humidity, light, and contaminants were strictly managed to preserve whatever remained. As the forensic technicians began steaming and gently scraping off decades-hardened mud with soft tools, Lauren watched through the glass, feeling like the past was being peeled away layer by layer. The first thing to appear under the mud was a deep scratch beside the driver's door handle. It wasn't rock or water damage, it was a pry mark, exactly where someone would insert a Slim Jim or screwdriver to open a locked door without a key. The technicians noted, the scratches ran from outside in, not inside out. That supported the theory that someone had tried to get into, or had broken into, Kaylee's car after she was already inside. The door was opened again with specialized tools. When the last of the mud was wiped from the steering wheel, the team recorded another anomaly, a small crescent-shaped dent at the top of the wheel, a spot that wouldn't normally see gripping force during regular driving. Preliminary analysis suggested it could come from someone squeezing the wheel hard, or from a struggle. Near that spot, under forensic alternate light, faint glowing streaks appeared, body oils left by palms or fingers. In the 90s those streaks would never have been collected or tested. In 2025 it was different. Technicians swabbed the entire area with specialized kits, gathering every microscopic sample. Next they moved to the passenger seat and front floorboard, where the mud had just been cleared. A faint reddish-brown streak about 2 fingers long appeared. Under normal light it looked like dirt or minerals, but under LED and forensic reagents, it turned the telltale color of hemoglobin reaction. In plain terms, blood. But it was so faint, so old, so diluted by lake water, that it couldn't be confirmed visually. The technicians used cutting extraction. They cut out sections of carpet, separated the layers, and placed them under microscopes to recover any remaining cells. Lauren knew this process could take days, even weeks, but it was the most valuable evidence in a no-body case. When they moved to the back seat, once again, the lake had preserved a critical clue: a single hair caught in the crevice between the seat and the body panel. The hair wasn't long like a woman's, it was short, dark, male. It seemed impossible for a hair to survive nearly 3 decades underwater, but because it was trapped in the sealed plastic trim, the anaerobic environment had protected it from total decomposition. Lauren jotted it down fast, tension rising. This wasn't hypothetical anymore. This was DNA from a man who had been inside the Civic right before it was dumped in the lake, and that man was almost certainly not Kaylee. As they continued cleaning the interior, the forensic team found a detail that made the lab go quiet for several seconds: a very faint bleach smell, especially under the steering wheel and front doors. After nearly 30 years, any odor surviving was almost impossible, unless bleach had been poured in large quantities, leaving chemical residue bonded to the plastic. The technicians ran a test kit, positive for hypochlorite, the main component of bleach. In other words, someone had tried to wipe the interior clean before the Civic disappeared. That didn't just raise suspicion, it changed the entire context of the case. It said, Kaylee did not vanish on her own. Someone else was involved, and that person had time, tools, and intent to eliminate traces. The technicians kept analyzing every surface. They found small fingernail gouges along the rear door edge, where someone in the back seat might claw in panic. Whether those marks were Kaylee's or someone else's wasn't clear, but they became part of the still incomplete picture. There had been a struggle, tension, something violent inside the front cabin. When they removed the plastic cover from the seatbelt anchor, the tear in the belt was fully exposed under forensic lighting. The tear wasn't from lake corrosion or age. It ran along the fibers, showing a fast, powerful force, like the belt had been yanked or pulled hard from behind. One technician said, "This kind of tear didn't happen when the car was dumped. Something happened first." Lauren wrote down every word, every detail, every shift on the technicians' faces. And finally, when the entire car was clean, she looked at the silver Civic up on the lift. No longer an invisible mud block, but a real crime scene. No body, no survivor, just small traces: hair, blood, pry marks, torn belt, bleach, heavy grip marks. But in cold cases, one trace can be the key to 29 years of secrets. Here, they had just found more than one. Lauren stood in front of the Civic for a long time. She knew the Kaylee Morgan case had just shifted from no crime scene to the most complicated crime scene the cold case unit had ever faced. And deep down, Lauren felt it clearly. The Civic was saying one thing very plainly: Kaylee had not gone into that lake alone. Someone had brought the car there. Someone had cleaned it. Someone knew what they were hiding. And now, after nearly 30 years, the traces they left behind were starting to tell the truth. When the first samples from the silver Civic were sent to the Texas DPS lab in Austin, Lauren McConnell knew this would be the first time in nearly 3 decades the Kaylee Morgan case would be seen through the eyes of modern science. 2025 technology far surpassed anything Midland police had in 1996, especially forensic-grade genome sequencing, touch DNA analysis, and recovering DNA from evidence destroyed by water and minerals. For weeks Lauren stayed in constant contact with the lab examiners. Every call began with the same question: anything yet? Then one late September afternoon, when the phone finally rang, she knew something big had come back. The DNA examiner got straight to the point: "We recovered 3 distinct DNA profiles in the vehicle." Lauren stood up straight, unconsciously gripping the Kaylee file tighter. She knew the Civic might hold Kaylee's DNA. But 3 profiles, that wasn't just unusual, it was extremely unusual for a case everyone had once assumed involved a single perpetrator. The examiner broke it down result by result, and each one cut another slice into the picture. Lauren thought she understood. Blood sample, result Kaylee Morgan. Even though the blood streak was tiny and diluted by 29 years underwater, The lab recovered enough nuclear DNA cells to run a comparison against the reference sample from Kaylee's hairbrush the family had provided in 1996. Conclusion: the blood was Kaylee's. Not a large amount, not gushing, just a very small quantity, possibly from the nose, forehead, mouth, or a light but impactful blow. More importantly, it happened inside the driver's area, not outside the car. This confirmed Kaylee had been injured, even if only slightly, while she was in the vehicle, or right before leaving it. Lauren felt a chill. This was no longer a possible voluntary disappearance, or maybe she ran away. This was the first physical proof she had suffered violence. Male hair. Result: male unknown B. The short hair caught between the rear seat and body panel was the most critical sample because it didn't belong to Kaylee, or to any family member, friend, or co-worker investigators had ever sampled in 1996. After full genome sequencing, the conclusion was clear. It belonged to an unidentified male temporarily labeled male unknown B. Not related to Kaylee, no match in CODIS criminal DNA database, not connected to anyone who ever owned, repaired, or rode in the car. Most telling, the root contained live cells, meaning the hair was pulled out with force, possibly during a struggle. A man's hair shed inside a young woman's car on the night she vanished, alone. 29 years underwater, and it survived. Lauren wrote slowly in her notebook, at least one adult male was inside Kaylee's car, immediately before it disappeared. But the call wasn't over. Touch DNA on the torn seatbelt. Result: unknown C. This was the part that stopped Lauren's heart. The ripped driver's seatbelt, already flagged as possible evidence of a struggle, was swabbed with ultra-sensitive kits for touch DNA, the skin cells left behind from forceful contact. Analysis took nearly 3 weeks. Result: a completely separate DNA profile, the third person. Not Kaylee, not male unknown B. A person whose DNA appeared nowhere else in the vehicle. The technician spoke slowly, giving Lauren time to process. The seatbelt has DNA from a separate individual. We've temporarily coded him. Unknown C. Lauren could barely breathe. One man inside the car, unknown B. Another who had touched the seatbelt, unknown C. And the two did not match each other. Did not match the family. Did not match any profile in the criminal databases. That meant the night Kaylee vanished wasn't just one possible perpetrator. There were at least 2 adult males involved. This was the biggest twist since the Civic had been pulled from the lake. Lauren asked the technician, any chance unknown B and unknown C are the same person and the samples got split wrong? The answer was firm. No, they are distinctly different. She pressed, could unknown C just be someone who repaired the car or touched the belt earlier? The technician replied, doesn't fit. The torn belt is a highly localized area, with DNA concentrated right in the tear zone. That's the spot that took force, not casual contact. In other words, unknown C's DNA was on the part of the belt that took the strain in the critical moment when someone yanked hard, pulled hard, or tried to drag Kaylee backward. Lauren felt her hands tremble, not from fear, but because she finally understood what no one 2 decades earlier had the tools to see. Kaylee hadn't just been attacked, she had been attacked by more than one person. The case was not simple, it had never been simple, from the very first night, but no one had the technology to see it. Lauren stared at her notes, realizing for the first time that the Kaylee Morgan case wasn't just a disappearance, it was an organized abduction and assault. 2 men, 2 non-matching DNA profiles, a Civic cleaned with bleach, pry marks on the door, signs of a struggle, a car deliberately sunk, and in the middle of it all, Kaylee, the only victim, gone. Lauren closed her laptop and sat in silence. She knew these DNA results were going to completely change the direction of the investigation. They were going to drag the entire case into an even deeper darkness, where 29-year-old secrets were finally starting to crack open. The preliminary DNA results had completely altered the nature of the Kaylee Morgan case. The existence of 2 separate male DNA profiles, unknown B and unknown C, not only proved Kaylee had been attacked, but showed the case was far more complex than anyone had ever imagined. But for Lauren McConnell, Unknown B was the first real key. It was the sample taken from the hair caught behind the seat, a location usually associated with someone in the back seat or leaning forward in a chaotic situation. Without hesitation, Lauren sent the unknown B profile to the lab she trusted most for forensic genetic genealogy. Othram, the company famous for cracking dozens of cold cases across the country. The DNA from the hair was shipped to their facility in the Woodlands, Texas, home to the most advanced genome analysis system law enforcement can access. It took Othram nearly 3 weeks to recover, reconstruct, and build an 850,000 marker DNA profile from the heavily degraded hair. When Lauren received the email titled, "Preliminary Genealogical Leads," her heart beat faster. This was something no one in 1996 could have done: draw a family tree from a single hair. Step 1. Building the genealogical web. Initial analysis showed unknown B carried markers, typical of a white American, with mostly Scottish and Irish ancestry, a fairly common profile in the Permian Basin. But what caught Lauren's eye was multiple matches at the third-fourth cousin level clustered around one surname. That surname was Harlan, concentrated mainly in the Odessa, Andrews, and southern Gardendale areas. Othram built a family tree going back to the late 1800s, linking branches through census records, birth certificates, and church registries. After about a week, they sent Lauren a genealogy report over 30 pages long, but the focal point was on page 4, a Harlan branch with descendants born in the 1970s, 1980s, who were living in Odessa at the time Kaylee vanished. In that branch, only 3 men fit the age, ancestry, and DNA match level for unknown B. But when Othram dug deeper, they eliminated 2. One had been living in Missouri since 1994, one enlisted and was stationed in California in 1996. Only one name remained within the geographic and temporal window of the crime. Step 2. The sole matching individual, Derek Harlan. The man's name was Derek Harlan, born 1974, occupation in 1996. Derek, hand oil rig technician, residence North Odessa, roughly 25 miles from Midland. Lauren read the preliminary dossier Othram sent and instantly felt the thread connecting present to past tighten. In 1996, Derek was a 22-year-old working one of the most quintessential West Texas jobs, oil field. It was shift work, night work, constantly moving, often driving deserted stretches no one paid attention to. In other words, someone like Derek could appear on any road between Odessa and Midland, and no one would remember or suspect a thing. But far more important was the test result. Unknown B matched 99.998% to the Harlan lineage. Derek Harlan was the only viable candidate for the DNA source. Othram recommended one final confirmatory step: an indirect DNA comparison, using a sample from one of Derek's close relatives, father or brother, if alive. Lauren checked records. Derek's father was deceased, but his older brother Thomas Harlan, age 54, still lived in Pecos. Lauren contacted the Pecos County Sheriff's Office for a warrant to collect a reference sample. When the comparison came back, the answer made her stare without blinking. Thomas Harlan's DNA matched 1-1, as a full sibling to the unknown B sample. That effectively confirmed unknown B equals Derek Harlan's DNA. At last, after 29 years, they had the identity of the man who had been inside the Civic. Lauren's reaction. Lauren set the file down, feeling both exhilarated and chilled. She thought back to the pry marks, the grip dents on the wheel, the hair, the bleach, Kaylee's blood, and the car pushed into the lake. When she put it all together, an image started forming in her mind. Derek had been inside Kaylee's car at a critical moment, but Kaylee had not been with Derek willingly. The hair, its location, and the blood all reinforced that. But there was a bigger problem. Unknown C, the DNA on the seatbelt, was not Derek. That meant the Kaylee Morgan case involved at least 2 perpetrators. Derek was only the first to surface. The second, unknown C, remained completely unknown. Lauren looked up at the timeline board. 1996. Kaylee vanishes. 1997. Case goes cold. 2007. File irregularities, discovered 2025. Car surfaces, due to drought 2025. DNA identifies Derek. Nearly 30 years, and they had finally placed the first brick in the perpetrator's portrait. But Lauren knew, Derek Harlan was only the first doorway. The second person, unknown C, was what would push the case into territory no one had ever imagined. And with Derek's identity confirmed, the Kaylee Morgan investigation officially entered a brand new phase. Once unknown B was confirmed as Derek Harlan, Lauren immediately arranged the first interview with him. Derek was now a 51-year-old man, living in an older mobile home on the outskirts of Odessa. When told police wanted to talk about a 1996 case, he showed no surprise and no fear. His eyes narrowed slightly, a forced half-smile, the look of someone used to the harsh oil field life and used to cops stopping by. In the interview room, Lauren kept her tone neutral, simply asking Derek to walk through the evening of October 12, 1996, the night Kaylee disappeared. Derek didn't hesitate. He answered right away, as if the story had been rehearsed in his head for years. That night I didn't go anywhere. I was at my buddy's place, Mark Dillon, drinking beer, smoking, watching the game. Stayed till morning. Lauren watched Derek's face closely when he said the name Mark Dillon. No blink, no pause, voice steady, exactly like someone who had told the same story so many times, it had become habit. Lauren followed up, any proof, receipts, anyone who can confirm. Derek shrugged, just Mark, he'll talk, go ask him. That seemingly casual remark was what caught Lauren's attention. Innocent people don't usually volunteer a witness's name so fast, they hate dragging friends into it. But Derek offered it instantly, like he wanted the police to do exactly what he had prepared for. Lauren wrote everything down, but inside she was already suspicious. A 29-year-old alibi is always risky for a liar. Step 1. Locate the man named Mark Dillon. That same afternoon, Lauren had the records team pull everything on Mark Dillon. Less than 30 minutes later, an officer came back with an odd look. Bad news, Mark Dillon is dead. Dillon had died in 2010 in a traffic accident in Andrews County. Nothing suspicious, but his death created a serious problem. The only person Derek had ever used as his alibi was gone. Lauren pulled the funeral records, death certificate, work logs, everything checked out. No one was left alive to vouch for Derek. That meant Derek's sole alibi could no longer be verified, but the story didn't end there. Step 2. Locate Mark Dillon's family. Lauren went to the home of Dillon's mother, now living in a quiet part of South Odessa. She was the last surviving immediate family member, and when Lauren asked about the evening of October 12, 1996, the woman went quiet for a moment before answering, I remember, Mark was home with me that night. His shoulder was killing him from night shifts the week before, so he wasn't going anywhere. Lauren stopped writing, a chill running down her spine. The mother continued, you asking about this makes me a little nervous, but Mark never left the house. He sat watching TV in the living room. I remember because I brought him his pain meds. That directly contradicted Derek's statement. If the mother was right, Mark never saw Derek that night, let alone drank beer with him till morning. Lauren left the Dillon house feeling everything starting to slip away from the story Harlan had built. But that was only the first layer. Step 3. Track down Dillon and Harlan's old crewmates. Lauren kept digging and located two men who had worked the same rigs with both of them in the 90s. The first, Jack Ramirez, thought for a minute and said, no way that happened. Mark and Derek, they didn't even like each other much. They got into it once on the rig because Derek borrowed tools and never gave them back. The second, Kenny Yates, said the exact same thing. Derek claims he and Mark were tight, no chance. They hadn't hung out since '95. Mark used to say he stayed clear of Derek. When Lauren asked if they remembered anything about a night in mid-October 1996, both gave the same answer. Derek wasn't on night shift, but we know he went out. He was drinking at Hitchcock's bar that night. Lauren flipped open her notebook. Hitchcock's bar sat less than 2 miles from the stretch Kaylee drove. Step 4. Uncover contradictions in the old file. Lauren wrote everything down, then went back to the records room to see if, in 1996, police had ever interviewed Mark Dillon. The answer: no. No one ever called Dillon. no one ever verified the alibi. Not a single note about Dylan anywhere in the Kaylee Morgan file. In other words, Derek's alibi had never been checked by police. It had simply existed in the first statement Derek gave, and it was accepted without question because the case had no crime scene. The new 2025 evidence made it crystal clear the alibi was fabricated. Lauren felt heat rush to her face when she realized what that really meant. Derek had lied, and lied on the very first question. Not just lied, he had built an alibi designed to be unverifiable, because the only person he used as a shield had been dead for years. When Lauren tracked down the last person who had spoken to Dylan before 2010, his ex-wife, her answer pulled the curtain all the way down. Derek Harlan once asked Mark to cover for him about something back in '96. Mark said no. They argued, then stopped talking. I don't know what it was about, but Mark told me Derek was into something real bad. Lauren didn't respond. She just felt every word hit like metal dropping onto cold concrete. Derek Harlan didn't just lack an alibi, he had a motive to create a fake one. And the only person who knew the truth, Mark Dillon, was dead. The Kaylee Morgan case had just stepped into a completely new darkness. A darkness where Derek's words no longer carried any weight, and every 29-year-old trace was starting to point straight at him, not as a witness, but as the first suspect. After proving Derek Harlan's alibi was fabricated, Lauren went back to a detail that had bothered her for months, the torn-out page 13 from the original file. At the time she had simply flagged it as an irregularity. But now, with Derek officially a suspect, she started re-examining the entire 1996 Midland investigative team. The Kaylee Morgan case had been handled by 4 initial on-duty detectives. 3 were retired, 1 was deceased. Lauren pulled the old personnel files, not to build a prosecution case, but to see who had been in charge of collecting reports and filing paperwork in the early days. When she cross-referenced dates, times and signatures, one name stood out as the person directly responsible for gathering the second night reports, the exact window when page 13 should have been added to the file. Deputy Chris Harlan. Lauren froze, her eyes moving to the timeline board covered in overlapping notes. Harlan. Same surname as Derek Harlan. She opened the personnel file. Chris Harlan, born 1968, had been a patrol officer before being temporarily moved to investigations in 1996. In the family section was a small note, Derek Harlan = first cousin. The picture suddenly became much clearer. Lauren left the room and walked quickly to the captain's office to report. She laid it all out, the torn page, the unsigned stakeout report, the inexplicable absence of any follow-up on Derek's alibi, and especially, the blood relationship between the investigator who handled the file and the suspect. The captain stared at the paperwork for a long time, then said, "If this is accurate, then this isn't just the Kaylee Morgan case. This could be tampering with an investigation from inside." Back in 1996, Lauren was given permission to access the internal archives, where duplicate copies of every report were kept on microfilm before being placed in the physical file. And there, on the microfilm reader, Lauren found what made her skin crawl. Page 13 still existed on microfilm, meaning it had been properly submitted before someone ripped it out of the hard copy case file. She zoomed in on the missing page. Page 13 contents. Summary. Report from a tanker driver, saw 2 vehicles driving erratically, one trying to crowd the other. Partial plate description, possibly starts with HAR. Direction of travel toward County Road 1130. Note, may be connected to reported missing silver Civic. Reporting officer, Deputy Chris Harlan. Lauren went still. Not lost. Not misplaced. The page had been filed, but only the hard copy was torn out. Why? Obvious, the suspicious plate started with HAR, matching the surname of his relative, Derek Harlan. In the microfilm room, Lauren had to steady herself with a hand on the table, because that report didn't just confirm Derek was in the area. Kaylee traveled. It proved the information had reached the system within 24 hours of her disappearance, but it vanished from the official file. Lauren brought the microfilm printout to the captain. When he finished reading, he said only one sentence, we have to open an obstruction of justice investigation into 1996. That was a seismic shift, not just pursuing Derek, but pursuing whoever deliberately erased the trail. Lauren tracked down the two surviving officers who had worked with Chris Harlan in 1996. Both confirmed Chris was on duty collecting reports the second night. Chris was responsible for filing the paperwork. Chris was the last person holding the file before it was stamped, case file. When Lauren asked if they thought Chris might have hidden something, one sighed after a long silence. Chris was real protective of family. Any cousin in trouble, he'd be the first to step up. The other added, if Derek was involved, Chris would do whatever it took to keep it from going deeper. Lauren understood. She had no proof. Chris knew Derek was directly involved with Kaylee, but she had clear proof. Chris had intentionally torn out a report page implicating a relative, failed to enter the stakeout report, never investigated Derek's alibi, never escalated the suspicious partial plate. That was tampering with an investigation by legal definition. And when Lauren looked at the full timeline again, she saw only one thing. The Kaylee Morgan case could have been solved as early as 1996. But someone for family, for fear or for weakness, had erased that chance. The case wasn't frozen for 29 years just because of a lack of leads. It was frozen because someone deliberately kept it on ice. After confirming page 13 had been torn out, and discovering Chris Harlan, Derek's cousin, was the one who manipulated the 1996 file, Lauren knew the next step was to re-examine every piece of physical evidence the original team had collected, but lacked the technology to fully understand. Because if an officer could hide information, the early traces needed fresh eyes. Lauren started with the most basic item that had been dismissed: the faint tire tracks at County Road 1130, where the 1996 search team noted partially erased tracks under dry dirt. Back then they were described vaguely: vehicle type undetermined, not enough to conclude, possibly an oil field truck. But in 2025, the old photos, both film prints and microfilm scans, could be run through AI tread matching software that compares tire patterns to commercial models from the 90s. Lauren sent every tire track image to the DPS analysis system. Less than 2 days later, a technician called back: tread matches 96% to a 1996 Ford F-150, Goodyear all-terrain, the most common tire in the region. Lauren needed a moment to breathe. Derek Harlan had owned a 1994 Ford F-150. Information Lauren had seen weeks earlier in DMV records, but back then the truck was just listed as property, never tied to the case. Now it was different. Very different. She checked the dates. Derek's F-150 was registered in May 1994 and sold at the end of 1998, meaning it absolutely existed the night Kaylee vanished. That night Derek claimed he was drinking at Mark Dillon's house and never drove anywhere. An alibi now completely dismantled. The F-150 matching the tracks at CR 1130 wasn't just a lead. It was a direct thread connecting Derek to the exact spot where Kaylee may have been blocked, struggled, or forced out of her car. Service log, another critical key. Lauren moved on to a small document. Most 1996 investigators had overlooked Derek's vehicle maintenance log, kept by a shop called Odessa Pit Crew. The file was a few faded yellow pages, ink bleached by time, but when Lauren spread them out, something felt off. There were 3 entries for tire replacement, brake work, and undercarriage repairs on the F-150. But the handwriting on the second page, the tire replacement entry, was completely different from the other 2. Specifically, the line replaced on November 1996, ink that was brighter blue than the rest. 1996 ink usually fades brown. Rounder letters, not the slanted handwriting of the regular mechanic. The 1 and 9, written in a more modern style, unlike 90s handwriting. Lauren carefully placed the sheet under forensic UV light. The result was even more startling. The date 11/1996 had been written over a fainter line beneath it. The technician explained, someone overwrote it with newer ink. The old ink faded unevenly, so UV brings out the trace. Lauren requested high-resolution digital imaging and ran it through handwriting recovery software. When the new ink layer was stripped away, the original line appeared, replaced on 1998, 2 years off, completely opposite to Derek's claim that the tires were replaced right after 1996, to prove the tracks at the scene couldn't be his. Lauren sat back, hands trembling slightly. This was proof the record had been deliberately altered. Derek, or someone acting for him, had changed the service log to create physical alibi evidence by pretending the tires had been replaced in 1996, so they couldn't have left the tracks at CR 1130. The truth, the old tires were still on the truck, at least until 1998. The scene tracks matched those old tires. Derek was in the area the night Kaylee vanished. Lauren wrote in her investigation notebook, "Physical evidence alter intentional concealment." And here's what made it especially dangerous: when Lauren cross-checked the date Derek brought the truck in for brake work, also on that same suspicious page, she saw the entry November 1998, clean interior due to odor. She set her pen down, cold sweat ran down her spine. 1998, 2 years after Kaylee disappeared. 2 years before the Civic was dumped in the lake, and someone had taken Derek's F-150 in to clean the interior because of a strange smell. No mechanic recorded what kind of smell, but Lauren knew vague notes like that in the 90s were usually written when the mechanic didn't want to ask questions, or when the customer asked them not to write details. She added one more line: "Suspect vehicle had odor in 1998. And when she placed the service log next to the tire track match, Lauren saw a story far clearer than anything the 1996 file had ever described. Derek Harlan was at County Road 1130. Derek's F-150 left the tracks. The service log was altered to hide it, and the cover-up happened years after Kaylee vanished. Lauren knew this was no longer an ordinary cold case. It was a systematic cover-up, long, sophisticated, and relentless. The Kaylee Morgan case hadn't died in 1996. It had been kept alive in the dark by people terrified the truth would come out. And now every piece of physical evidence was coming back, as if the West Texas ground itself was spitting out the secrets it had been forced to swallow. After destroying the fake alibi, proving the service log was altered, and matching the tire tracks to Derek's F-150, Lauren knew she was inches from the decisive moment. She had to obtain a direct DNA sample from Derek Harlan. The legal system required a standard reference sample for a 1:1 comparison with unknown B inside Kaylee's car, and if it matched, Derek would move from person of interest to prime suspect. But to collect the sample, police needed a warrant, and a warrant required solid probable cause. The evidence wasn't quite there until Lauren spotted an unexpected opening. During discreet surveillance in Odessa, Lauren's team watched Derek leave the small gas station where he worked part-time. West Texas weather was hot and dry, and Derek always carried a plastic water bottle. During his break, he sat on the bench behind the store, took a few swallows, then set the bottle down beside the trash can. At the end of his shift he stood up, tossed the bottle in the trash, and went inside to clock out. Lauren signaled the surveillance team. In less than 5 seconds, a forensic technician on the team approached the trash can, used gloved hands and an evidence bag, and quietly retrieved the bottle before anyone noticed. The entire recovery was filmed to prove unbroken chain of custody. Lauren took the evidence bag in silence. She looked through the plastic teeth marks on the cap, leftover water, possible lip and tongue cells on the rim. This was the moment a 29-year-old cold case had been waiting for. The bottle was rushed to the DPS lab. Technicians extracted DNA using FTA micro-swab techniques, especially effective on saliva and mouth cells. When they sent the message sample viable, Lauren almost stopped breathing. 3 days later, the official result landed in the investigation team's secure inbox. Moni chain eopa per sample 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 per. Lauren opened the email. The very first line made her hands shake. Report match. Derek Harlan =unknown BHA sample. She read it over and over. 99.99987% genome match. Full genealogical lineage match. SMP markers consistent. Zero chance of error. The hair in the Civic belonged to Derek Harlan. No more doubt, no more theories, no more coincidence. Lauren slumped back in her chair, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of 29 years collapsing into one point. They finally had the single most critical forensic confirmation in the entire case. Derek Harlan had been inside Kaylee Morgan's car, at a critical moment, before the Civic was bleached and pushed into Lake J.B. Thomas. Lauren closed her eyes for a second, then opened her notebook, and wrote exactly 3 lines in red ink. Harlan =unknown B. Harlan was inside the Civic. Harlan is the prime suspect. But just as she was about to close the laptop, another thought hit her, cold, sharp, and more frightening. Derek Harlan was only one of 2. Unknown C, the person who left DNA on the seatbelt, was still in the dark. Catching Derek was only the beginning. There was still a second man hiding in the shadows of 1996. One who hadn't surfaced yet, but who had been behind every clue. Lauren knew arresting Derek would drag the other one out. The next hunt would be far harder. Once the DNA result confirmed Derek Harlan as unknown B, Lauren McConnell knew the confrontation could not be delayed. The arrest warrant was signed Monday morning, carrying 3 charges: suspected kidnapping, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. A joint federal, local task force with Odessa PD was deployed to ensure no unexpected confrontation. Derek had worked rigs, had a history of fighting, and might have weapons in the house. That afternoon, as the slanted West Texas sun cut through the metal fence around the mobile home park where Derek lived, unmarked police vehicles rolled in quietly. Derek stepped out onto the porch holding a beer can, face blank, like he was lost in thought. When he saw Lauren get out of the car holding the warrant, his expression changed. Not angry, not defiant, but frozen, like a man who had just seen the thing he'd waited his whole life for, but dreaded facing. An officer read him his Miranda rights. Derek didn't fight, didn't run, didn't yell. He only said 4 words. I knew it. Those words sent a chill through Lauren, not because of acceptance, but because Derek's voice sounded exactly like someone who knew the noose was already tight, yet was still clinging to the last scrap of rope to delay the inevitable. DNA confrontation in the Midland County interview room. Derek was placed in front of an envelope containing the lab report. Lauren slid the document across the table. We have your DNA inside Kaylee's car. Derek stared at the paper, then let out a short, joyless laugh, like a man who knew the road had ended. I knew this day would come. One day. Lauren stayed silent, waiting. Derek took a long breath and said, I did meet her that night. That part's true, but not the way you think. Lauren tilted her head. Go on. Derek started his story in a low voice. Kaylee was pulled over on a dirt turnout near an old well. She said the car wouldn't start. I was driving by. I stopped. Lauren didn't blink. Derek continued. I just helped fix the car. That's all. Jumped the solenoid. Then I left. That was it. Lauren looked at him, expression unchanged. So why is your DNA in the back seat? Derek went quiet. A vein pulsed in his forehead, but he stuck to the story. Maybe I leaned in, or braced my hand. I don't remember. Lauren opened the timeline board and set it in front of him. The car was cleaned with bleach, then dumped in a lake. The seatbelt was torn. Kaylee was injured. And you want me to believe you just helped fix the car? Derek swallowed hard, but kept the same tone. I didn't do anything to her. I fixed it, I got out, and I left. I don't know what happened after that. Lauren let him finish, then pulled another document from the file. This one had never been made public, even in 1996. Police didn't have the technology to hear it properly. Derek, Lauren said, "Earlier you said 3 exact words, then I left. Do you know why that phrase caught my attention?" Derek frowned, confused. Lauren opened her laptop and played a 3-second audio clip, extracted from the last phone call Kaylee made to her sister the night she vanished. It was the 30-second call everyone knew about, but in 2025, the forensic audio team had run audio reconstruction software to recover background noise. From the 1996 static, they had isolated a faint sentence, just a few words, distant, muffled, but unmistakable. "He's getting out of the truck." Kaylee didn't say it. A man's voice. Low, pure West Texas drawl. Lauren stopped the playback. The room fell into heavy silence. Derek was no longer leaning back in his chair. His eyes were wide open, as if his throat had closed without a sound. Lauren spoke slowly. "You said, I got out of the truck and left. But the voice on the call says, he's getting out of the truck." Same 3 words, same structure. She paused. "Derek, why does that voice sound exactly like you?" The air in the room froze. Derek turned his face away, took a deep breath, his hands shaking. It wasn't the tremble of an innocent man. It wasn't the tremble of someone being coerced. It was the tremble of a man watching his past come back. A past he thought had sunk with the Civic to the bottom of the lake, 29 years ago. Lauren sat up straight. "You were just helping with the car. Then why is your voice on Kaylee's final phone call?" Derek put his hands over his face, shaking hard. Finally, in a hoarse, broken voice, he said, I wasn't alone." Lauren narrowed her eyes. "Explain." Derek stared down at the cold metal table, eyes red. "There was someone else. Someone I'm still scared to even name." Lauren leaned forward. "His name?" Derek swallowed hard, lips trembling. "My cousin, Jake." The Kaylee Morgan case had just entered its darkest chapter. The second man, unknown C, finally had a name. After Derek Harlan uttered the name, Jake, Lauren knew something didn't line up. The third DNA profile, unknown C, did not carry the Harlan genetic markers. That meant Jake could be a nickname. Or Derek was trying to misdirect. But Lauren also understood, DNA doesn't lie. Derek can, so she set the statement aside and focused on the only thing she trusted, the unknown C sample. It came from the seatbelt, the area that took heavy force, consistent with a struggle. That meant unknown C wasn't just touching the car, he had a direct role in restraining Kaylee. Lauren sent the unknown C sample to Othram, the same lab that had cracked unknown B. This time the genealogy process was faster, better sample quality, and an expanded network from the Harlan branch. 3 weeks later, Othram sent the results. One line made Lauren stand up immediately. Unknown C matches Ryler family, Odessa. She zoomed in on the attachment. The confirmation was crystal clear. Unknown C DNA 99.994% match to the Ryler lineage, only viable candidate, in the age and area bracket, Brent Ryler. Lauren sat still for a moment. That name had appeared before, not in the 1996 file, but in the internal investigation. Brent Ryler, born 1973, worked the same rigs as Derek in 1996, regularly rode with Derek on night shifts, lived near Highway 349, 15 minutes from where Kaylee vanished. Brent's criminal record was minor, nothing major, but the real shock was on page 2. Brent Ryler disappeared in 2002, no body, no vehicle, no trace, no one ever knew where he went. Lauren felt goosebumps rise on her arms. A suspect in Kaylee's disappearance, gone 6 years later, never solved. She immediately cross-checked the timeline. 1996, Kaylee vanishes. 1998, F-150 odor cleaning. Derek's truck service 2002, Brent Ryler disappears. Forensic and logical angles, both pointed to one chilling possibility. Brent Ryler unknown C had been inside Kaylee's Civic. He was no longer alive to be questioned, and his disappearance might not have been random. Lauren took the file to the investigation room for deeper review. The 2002 report said Brent left home to buy parts and never returned. His truck was found a week later on a vacant lot near Pecos, but Brent himself was gone. No one ever connected it to Kaylee. The case was frozen, and there was no DNA back then. But now everything had changed. Unknown C, the DNA on the seatbelt, matched Brent. Lauren sat down and wrote in her notebook, unknown C =, Brent Ryler. Strong possibility, Brent was killed to silence him. Organized crime or Derek's actions. No one knew the truth in 2002. No one followed up. Brent vanished, and the file closed like hundreds of other West Texas missing person cases. Lauren felt empty for a few seconds, like watching a movie with missing frames. Brent was clearly involved with Kaylee. He was in the car. He pulled on the seatbelt. He was the man Kaylee saw or heard. But Brent was no longer here to tell his side, and his disappearance made the truth of 1996 far darker. Lauren looked up at the investigation board. Derek, alive, lying cornered. Brent gone, unsolved. The Kaylee Morgan case no longer had just one living suspect to pursue. It had two shadows, one breathing, one vanished, and the most terrifying question now stood out clearly. If Brent knew something, and Derek needed it buried, what happened to Brent Ryler in 2002? The case was no longer just about finding Kaylee, it was about finding two lives, and the footprints of whoever buried them in 29 years of darkness. After unknown C was identified as Brent Ryler, Lauren returned to the interview room to confront Derek Harlan one more time. She didn't beat around the bush. In front of Derek was the DNA report. Brent Ryler was in Kaylee's car the night she disappeared. Derek stared at the paper, like he was looking at a door that had been locked for decades, suddenly swinging open. No more denials, no escape, no more layers of cover. Lauren said flatly, Brent was the other guy, and now he's dead. You're the only one left alive to tell the story. Derek closed his eyes, fists clenched as if trying to hold back something flooding out of his memory. Then, after a long heavy silence, he started talking, voice slow, hoarse and choked, as if every sentence were a stone on his chest. Brent was the one who attacked Kaylee. Derek said that night, after their shift, he and Brent were driving toward Midland to get beer. Brent spotted Kaylee's Civic, pulled off on a dirt turnout near an old well. According to Derek, Brent said he wanted to stop and see what was up. Derek admitted, I thought he was joking. I didn't think he did, but when we got close, Kaylee was scared, obviously scared. At that moment Lauren could hear the tremor in Derek's voice, not remorse, but fear of the truth finally coming out after 29 years. Brent walked up to Kaylee, started talking with a cocky tone. Kaylee refused. Tried to start the car, but Brent blocked the door. Derek said Kaylee screamed, matching the short scream a witness heard in 1996. While Kaylee tried to fight the door, Brent grabbed her arm and yanked hard. Derek said, he did it all so fast, I didn't even react in time. Lauren didn't fully believe him, but let him keep going. I tried to stop him, but Brent shoved me back. Derek claimed when he tried to pull Brent off Kaylee, Brent hit him in the shoulder, then forced Kaylee back into the driver's seat. The struggle tore the seatbelt, matching the forensic damage. Derek admitted, Kaylee's blood. That was Brent slamming her head into the steering wheel. Not hard, but enough to daze her. Lauren wrote down every word, mentally matching it to the forensics. Kaylee's small blood stain. Unknown C. Brent touched DNA on the seatbelt. Heavy grip marks on the wheel. Everything lined up with Derek's story. But what came next was what Lauren hadn't expected. After that, Brent made me help him. Derek described, Brent dragged the unconscious Kaylee out of the car. Derek said Brent panicked, didn't want evidence left behind. He ordered Derek to help pull the Civic farther down the dirt road. Then they used Derek's F-150 to tow the Civic toward J.B. Thomas. When they reached the lake shore, Brent told Derek to help push the car into the water. Derek said, I didn't want to, but Brent told me if I didn't, he'd say I did the whole thing. That, Lauren recognized, was the classic claim of the weaker accomplice, always insisting they were forced. Derek took a long breath, as if trying to escape the smell of lake mud still haunting his memory from 1996. We pushed the car in. It sank faster than I thought. Then he said the sentence that sent ice through Lauren. After that, Brent said it wasn't over. He poured bleach inside the car. He said we have to erase everything. That was the forensic truth. Lingering bleach odor, recorded hypochlorite residue, heavily wiped interior surfaces. Derek couldn't have invented forensic details, only the investigation knew. 2002, Brent vanishes. When Lauren asked, "So what about 2002, what happened when Brent disappeared?" Derek went silent for a very long time. A very, very long time. Then he spoke in a voice so low it barely sounded like his own. "Brent kept it over my head for years. He threatened me. He blackmailed me. He said if I ever went against him, he'd tell everything." Lauren felt the investigation slow down, like cold air had just poured into the room. Derek stared at his own hands, shaking as if they still carried the smell of 2002 engine oil. "That night, Brent came to my house. He was drunk. He wanted money. He said he was going to the cops." Lauren didn't blink. "What did you do?" Derek answered, each word dropping like a knife on the steel table. "I didn't kill him. But I let him drive off when he wasn't sober." Lauren leaned back slightly. "Drive where?" "Toward Pecos. That stretch of road, no guardrails. I thought he'd make it home. But he never did." Lauren understood. In West Texas, sometimes you don't have to lift a hand. Nature, darkness, and liquor can do the rest. But Derek never reported it, never searched, never told the truth for 23 years. That was concealment. Derek clenched his fists and said the final line. "I thought that was the night everything got wiped clean." Lauren stood up and closed the file. "No, Derek. That was just the night you thought it got wiped clean. The Kaylee Morgan case didn't have just one perpetrator. It had an attacker, Brent Ryler, and an accomplice who covered it up and stayed silent for 29 years, Derek Harlan." The darkness of 1996 finally had a shape. The trial of Derek Harlan opened at the Midland County Courthouse on a November morning in 2025, under intense Texas media coverage. No one had forgotten Kaylee Morgan, the 21-year-old who vanished on a dusty West Texas night in 1996, and the re-emergence of the silver Civic from the bed of Lake J.B. Thomas had shaken the entire state. But what made this trial the focal point wasn't just the 29 years that had passed. It was the precision of modern forensic science tearing apart decades of frozen manipulated investigation. The prosecution opened by laying out the entire forensic chain, each piece rebuilt like dominoes that could not be refuted. 1 DNA in the vehicle, faint blood streak, Kaylee Morgan, hair unknown, 9.99%, Derek Harlan, touch DNA on seatbelt, unknown seatbelt, unknown seat. Brent Ryler, 2 forensic sequencing, hypochlorite, bleach residue on steering wheel, doors proof of cleaning, pry marks on driver's door, forced entry from outside. 3, kinesiology evidence, heavy grip marks on steering wheel, seatbelt torn in struggle direction, strange odor in Derek's F-150 in 1998. 4, tire tracks, faint, 1996 tracks from CR 1130, restored by AI. 96% match to Derek's 1994 Ford F-155, GIS reconstructed timeline, blind spots on FM 1788, 3 possible intercept points for Kaylee, all overlapping areas where Harlan and Ryler worked. 6, recovered audio from the final phone call, a 3-second clip that was nearly useless in 1996, now restored with AI denosing. "He's getting out of the truck." Male voice, 87% spectral match to Derek's voice sample. All of it was presented to the jury as an airtight matrix of evidence that left no room for doubt. Every story Derek had ever told, helping fix Kaylee's car, leaving before anything happened, was dismantled layer by science. Under days of forensic pressure and cross-examination, Derek Harlan repeated his interview statements. Brent was the attacker. Derek was forced. He never meant to hurt Kaylee. Brent threatened him for years. Brent's 2002 disappearance was an accident. But the prosecutor fired back. "If you were innocent, why didn't you ever go to the police? Why alter the truck service log to hide the tires? Why pour bleach in the Civic? Why help push the car into the lake? Derek's silence was the answer. After 2 weeks of trial, the jury returned after only 4 hours of deliberation. Harlan was found guilty on kidnapping with bodily injury. On manslaughter, no body recovered. Tampering with evidence, tampering with a government investigation. The judge sentenced him to 38 years with no parole before 30. Primary basis, DNA. Struggle evidence. Harlan's contradictory statements, scene cleaning behavior, and especially, deceased accomplice, Ryler shifted full legal responsibility onto Harlan. Lauren sat in the back row, not joyful, not relieved, just empty. Justice for Kaylee had taken a giant step, but the rest still lay in shadow. How exactly did Brent Ryler die? Who else helped cover it up? Was anyone else hiding in the 1996 darkness? Immediately after sentencing, the court issued an official notice, Brent Ryler Missing Person Case 2002, reclassified as suspected homicide. That meant, Brent was no longer considered a voluntary disappearance. His death or disappearance was now a separate criminal case, and Derek Harlan, despite his denials, would be the central figure in that investigation. The trial ended, but the 1996 darkness still had one unanswered name, and Lauren knew, only when they finally learned what really happened to Brent Ryler in 2002, would the darkness surrounding the night Kaylee Morgan vanished completely lift. News of Derek Harlan's conviction spread across Midland in hours. A town used to the rhythm of feral cats, dust storms, and all-night oil rigs suddenly stood still in deep shock. Few had expected that Kaylee Morgan's disappearance, the 21-year-old seen as a victim of one too quiet West Texas night, had actually been buried under 29 years of lies, silence, and hands that bent justice. Residents of Midland, Odessa, and the entire Permian Basin flooded social media with questions. Why did an officer tear out a report page? Why was Brent Ryler never pursued in 1996? Why weren't the tire tracks ever matched? And most importantly, how many other cases are still in the dark? Older folks said it felt like a piece of the town's memory had been rewritten. Younger generations said, if it weren't for the 2025 drought, we might never have known. Immediately after the trial, the Midland County Sheriff's Office launched a full internal investigation into Deputy Chris Harlan, the man who tore out page 13 and manipulated the 1996 file. Chris, now living in Colorado, was summoned back for questioning. The microfilm evidence and torn page ink traces were undeniable. He faced charges of tampering with investigation, suppressing evidence, official misconduct. For the first time in history, Midland publicly admitted that part of the reason Kaylee wasn't found sooner lay with misconduct inside its own 1996 investigative force. It was a massive shock to a community that had always seen law enforcement as the most reliable foundation on dangerous West Texas nights. After the trial, the district court ordered 3 major oil companies that operated the rigs where Derek and Brent worked in 1996 to open their personnel archives, including night shift schedules, incident reports, disciplinary files, company vehicle assignments. Those records had been ignored in the 90s as not directly relevant to a missing person search. In 2025, they became critical data for reconstructing Derek's and Brent's true movements the night Kaylee vanished, and for finally answering who did exactly what. To the community, it was a signal for the first time the entire system was being forced to face the past it had let slide. Winter 2025, a small but solemn ceremony was held on the shore of Lake J.B. Thomas. The Morgan family, Kaylee's friends, and many Midland residents placed a stone marker engraved with her name at the exact spot near where the Civic was pulled up, the place she had lain silent beneath mud and water for nearly 3 decades. The simple throat-tightening inscription read, Kaylee Morgan, 1975, missing 1996, never forgotten. Lauren stood in the back, watching the wind blow across the depleted lake. The crowd was quiet. No one wanted to break that silence, the same silence that had hidden a crime 29 years earlier, now transformed into a final prayer for Kaylee. As the sun set and darkness covered the lake, Lauren lightly touched the stone and whispered, "The night Kaylee vanished, the truth was pushed to the bottom of the lake, but the water receded, and the secrets rose." The story closed at J. Thomas, where the heart of West Texas had finally revealed what it had been forced to keep silent for 3 decades. And in the cold early winter wind, everyone knew, justice may come late, but it still comes. The story of Kaylee Morgan, and the 29-year journey to the truth, is more than a criminal case. It is a mirror reflecting issues that still exist in American society today. The fact that an officer like Chris Harlan could tear out a critical report page, hide tire track leads, and never follow up on the tanker driver's tip shows how vital transparency in law enforcement remains. Small mistakes or worse, cover-ups, can cost decades of justice, a reality Americans still face when revisiting wrongful conviction files and cold cases across the country. The 2025 GIS mapping that reconstructed Kaylee's route, combined with forensic sequencing from the Civic recovered beneath Lake J.B. Thomas, reminds us that modern science and technology are powerful allies of justice. In an era when America is investing heavily in forensic labs and genetic genealogy, Kaylee's story is the clearest proof that technology can give victims back their voice, even after nearly 3 decades of silence. Brent Ryler's 2002 disappearance, and the fact that no one ever followed up, reflects the indifference often shown toward workers in heavy industry regions, where one man going missing can be treated as just how it is. It is a reminder that communities and authorities need to care more about the people who are rarely seen, those working rigs, night shifts, far from family. Finally, the greatest lesson comes from Kaylee's family: persistence. They never gave up even when phones went dead, files were torn, and the case was frozen. In a country as vast as the United States, where thousands disappear every year, their refusal to quit is what keeps the light on for every other case. Justice may come late, but it never comes on its own, if we stop searching. If you believe stories like Kaylee Morgan's deserve to be told to the end, please subscribe to the channel, so we can keep giving a voice to the forgotten cases. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, where we continue searching for the truth time tried to hide.